pleasure to have you on my show. We just discovered we're both Canadian, so welcome, fellow Canadian. Welcome.
Oh, yes, very good to different sides of the country, but we're here together for sure. It's one of the great things about podcasts.
Yes, yes. Actually, sometimes you look at it and it's like you're over there. I was used to be there. I've traveled there. It's like bringing the world as big as it is into the homes of everyone that's listening and watching.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty neat for sure.
So I know today we're going to talk about some big topics, like we mentioned. We're going to talk about mental health. We're going to talk about anxiety, anger, core belief, all how it impacts us. So do me a favor before we jump right into this. Introduce yourself and tell my audience, how did you get involved in this type of work and why?
Sure. So I was a learning assistant teacher, taught in every grades, right from kindergarten all the way up to grade 11. As a learning assistant teacher, dealing with a lot of kids with learning disabilities, attention deficit, uh, anger issues, anxiety, self confidence issues. Towards the end of my teaching career, I decided I wanted to be a school counselor. So I started on that path. I went to a workshop, and at the end of the 3 day workshop, I thought, wow, this is what I need to do. And the workshop was on suicide, but it was looking at it through the perspective of a person's core belief, that core belief feeling not good enough, not important, or not valued. And so I went back and forth with Tony Martins, who was the presenter. We talked for about a year. He finally agreed to teach me his model of therapy. And so I quit teaching, moved back to Fort St. John, my hometown, and started as a counselor in my own private practice here. That was back in 2010. And within about 6 months, I had a waiting list, and I've had a waiting list ever since. And I hate having to turn people away and just say, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. So I decided to write a book. So I wrote a book called Not Good Enough: Understanding Your Core Belief and Anxiety, as a resource to be able to provide for people who can't access counseling or aren't able to take that step. They're kind of nervous about going to a counselor for whatever issue, whatever stigma or whatever it is. So this is a way to kind of poke your nose into a little bit of information without diving right in.
Perfect. So it sounds like you were experienced enough to understand what was going on, and then you did the work to better assist people. So let me ask you then, what is causing, or what maybe are some of the causes of the anxiety, of the mental health struggles that a lot of people face today?
Well, what this model of therapy believes is it really does come down to that core belief. So if I feel not good enough, not important, not valued, I'm not going to be very content with myself. I'm not going to have a lot of confidence. I'm not going to believe in myself. And so one of the big symptoms of a core belief not good enough is higher anxiety. Anxiety is actually lack of confidence, not believing in yourself that you can handle something. A lot of people think anxiety is about the trigger. I have anxiety, social anxiety, being around other people. Well, if it was really about socializing, everyone would have that. Not everyone does. So anxiety is not believing in myself I can handle it. So if I don't believe I can handle socializing, I'm going to have social anxiety. If I believe I can handle socializing, I'm not going to have anxiety. So anxiety is the opposite of confidence. The more confidence I have, the less anxiety. So if that core belief is not good enough, I'm going to have more self doubt. I'm going to have higher anxiety. So we need to challenge and change at that core belief level, not just at the anxiety level. We just can't challenge the anxiety, but don't address the core belief underneath it. It's going to be this thing that's going to keep reoccurring forever and ever and ever.
I remember a time in my life where I suffered from something like that, and it was because I didn't believe that I was going to succeed in life. And I became anxious. And I wonder how many people out there in their teens, in their 20s, who suffer from the same anxiety and they don't have the guidance. Because I'll tell you something, Sabrina, I definitely didn't have the knowledge to be able to handle it. Like a lot of people in their teens, we think we do. We're arrogant enough. We have the arrogance of wisdom, but we don't actually have the wisdom. So if it's a
Right.
core belief, then what can we do at the different stages in our life to address the core beliefs so they don't become anxiety, but we can turn them around into confidence?
I think the very first thing we have to do is become aware of how significant that core belief is and how often it does actually kind of pop up and drive our actions, our behaviors, our thoughts, our perceptions. When I talk with my clients, they'll come in and they say, I need counseling because I struggle with marijuana, or I have anger issues, or I can't sleep properly, or whatever it might be. And when we talk about how those are really the symptoms of something else, that core belief, they often say, "Yeah, I never realized that's what it was, but that is what it is." So if I'm not even aware, I don't even know I should change it. I'm not going to be able to change it. So part of what we have to do first is become aware of how often does that core belief pop its head. It can be varying degrees. Some people's core belief is, pretty good enough, important, and valued, but every once in a while, that not good enough pops up. Other people feel not good enough, not important, not valued, extremely intensity all the time, all day long. So you have to figure out where yours is, and then you can start to challenge it. But if you don't really know where your core belief is, it makes it really hard to do something about it. People ask me, well, how old are you when your core belief gets starts to develop? The truth of the matter is, it honestly starts before you're even born. If we look at
So,
parents,
no, I was going to say, like, because you're about to mention parents, so continue with that before you're even born and then the parents themselves.
yeah. So if I have two parents whose core belief is not good enough, how can they have a child who believes they are good enough? It becomes really, really challenging. And so we see this happening generationally where it just kind of gets passed down, right? If I have a parent who has high anxiety, they are teaching me to have anxiety about all these things that, all the things that the parent has anxiety about. I'm going to think, well, if my mom or my dad can't even deal with this, I can't deal with it. And so it gets this learned core belief, it gets passed down. It's not genetic, it's learned, but it's learned right from before we're even born.
So could that be then if let's say you have a child that is being raised in a household that is abusive, or maybe there's a lack of parenting that can heighten the anxiety and further provide that child with core beliefs that would not be beneficial to their life.
That, excuse me, that's exactly right. Children who grow up in a home where there is abuse, excuse me, where there's abuse, where there's volatility, where there's chaos, where there's neglect, where there's addictions. What's the message? You're not good enough. You're not important. And so they get more and more anxiety because their sense of safety is being impacted on a regular basis. That's going to create more of that core belief, not good enough, not important, not valued. So then they end up kind of feeding off each other in this cycle where, my parents yelling at me, I feel not good enough. So then I do something to kind of reinforce that. And then my parents get mad at me again. And the cycle just keeps going and going and going and going. Then I move out, not even living at home anymore. But that pattern of thinking is in my brain. Now I'm drawn to people, places, experiences. I'm putting myself in situations where I can continue to feel that same way. Feel fear, feel insecurity, feel neglect, feel abandoned, feel insecure. I'm drawn and will create those things over and over and over again.
I remember talking to someone and she was sharing that she had a rough childhood, but it became better because I guess the parents realized what was going on, so they started to make changes. But unfortunately for her, it seemed like it was a little later than it would have benefited her. So what she did is she started to look for love, attention in all these different ways, right? And then I took a step back and then I asked myself, I wonder how this these core beliefs, this anxiety, this lack of mental fitness impacts women and impacts men. Because you would see that maybe a lot of men when they're not necessarily getting what they need growing up, a lot of them turn to anger, to violence, and things like that, right? Women, on the opposite side, a lot of them turn to being promiscuous, seeking attention from men. Do you know how it impacts men and women maybe differently and similarly?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful because, everyone is so different, but it is more socially acceptable for men to be angry. It's been going on for, the warriors, and, it's just be tough, suck it up, push all that other emotion down. When we really look at what anger is, it is what we do to avoid feeling other emotions. So, what we say about anger is it's not a standalone emotion. If you think about a time in your past where you felt angry and stopped and thought about what other emotions were underneath there, you would likely see things like anxiety, fear, self doubt, lonely, abandoned, rejection, unheard, unloved, vulnerable, fear. We don't like to feel those emotions. So when they start to come up, switch it to anger. Now all I have to do is just get angry. I can push all those other emotions down. So anger is an emotion, but it is also a significant coping strategy that we use to avoid dealing with those other emotions that we don't want to deal with. The other thing anger does is it also suppresses that core belief: not good enough, not important, not valued. But then after I'm angry, then I feel bad because I got angry, I damaged relationships. I get to beat myself up even more, supporting that core belief: not good enough, not important, not valued. When we look at anger in a cycle, there's stages that we go through. So we start with the explosion. This is where we get really angry. Then we have the honeymoon stage. The honeymoon stage is just that sense of kind of calm, relief, everything settles a bit. Sometimes there's, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have got angry. Let's go to a movie or something along those lines. But a lot of times it's just calm. But then life happens. And with everything we do, it creates emotion. So you can't get your tech to work properly, creates emotion. You forget your keys, creates emotion. You're running behind for work, you forgot to get fuel in your vehicle, creates emotion. Those are just the little things that happen on a daily basis. That doesn't include the baggage of emotion that you've been carrying for decades that you haven't dealt with, you've just pushed down. So that emotion builds and builds and builds and builds. And then we need some sort of a trigger so we can get angry again. And that is the cycle that continues. Problem with it is it's a cycle. There's no end to it. It just keeps going and going and going and going. And what I see a ton of families do is they really focus on the trigger. Just get rid of the trigger. That's how we break the cycle. So, angry parents coming home, one child runs and cleans the counter because a dirty counter was a trigger last week. The other one runs and puts the dog outside because that was a trigger 3 days ago. The other one runs and puts the coats in the front entranceway because them laying on the floor was a trigger yesterday. Angry parent comes home, TV's too loud. Boom, explosion happens. It's not the trigger that feeds the cycle. It's the buildup of emotion. We know that because often we'll get mad about something, but it's happened many, many times before, never caused any anger last time. So why is it now? Because I'm full up with emotion. When I'm full up with emotion, I need something to try to release it. Problem with anger in that cycle is the emotion kind of comes out, then it all falls right back down on top of you. Plus, now you have to carry guilt, shame, regret, disconnect because you got mad at people that you're supposed to love and care about. So you got even more emotion. So what happens is that cycle becomes more and more significant over time. So instead of, yelling, now I'm yelling and screaming and name calling. Then I'm hitting things. Then I'm grabbing people. And so we see that behavior progress as time goes on. But that's not just the cycle of anger. That's the cycle of anything we use to avoid and distract from feeling emotion. Promiscuity fits in there, right? I go out, have sex, casual sex with people. I get a dopamine rush and oxytocin rush where I get that physical contact. So I get to chemically feel loved and connected without really feeling vulnerable in doing it. But then the next day, the walk of shame, I feel bad, I beat myself up. Then life happens, stress builds, I got more and more going on, some sort of a trigger. I go out and have casual sex again. So it is the cycle of alcohol as well. I go out and get drunk, feel really bad the next day, but then life builds and builds and builds. So another trigger to go out and get drunk again. So any coping strategy, we call it any unhealthy coping strategy, because general idea is unhealthy coping strategy is what we are using to suppress emotions. So any unhealthy coping strategy that we're using to distract or suppress from emotions is going to fit in that cycle. This could be lying, stealing, cheating, alcohol, drugs, anger, you name it. Anything that we use, busyness, anything that we use to distract from feeling our emotions will fit in that cycle.
So sometimes I wonder then, could it be maybe because you mentioned the parents have an impact as well? And then you mentioned that we use some of these behaviors that I described to cope with it, to soothe us in a sense, right? It's
Yep.
like our emotional pacifier. I'm going to use
Right.
the drugs. I'm going to use alcohol. I'm going to use the
Right.
women. I'm going to use the men. I'm going to use the rage. I'm going to use the anger, everything. How much of an impact does seeing that behavior in our household, our parents using it to soothe, let's say, for example, the alcoholic parents soothing their problems with the alcohol, how much of that does have an impact on the children growing up to then use the same methods to soothe themselves?
It normalizes it. So if I see my parent using alcohol to numb time after time after time after time, I'm learning, oh, I know how I can numb. Have a beer, have six beer, have a 26 or a vodka, whatever it is. I'm learning that behavior. So we often see those behaviors repeating themselves over and over and over again, because I mean that's how we learn, is by seeing the behavior, reading about the information, whatever it is. If we have a parent that's done it time after time after time after time, there's a really good chance